for another chat. I'm using my Barber Days barber shop at home mug today. Can you see the steam coming off of that stuff? Hot and fresh. Today we're drinking Sterling Roastery breakfast blend. If you're in the shaving world at all, you've heard of Sterling for sure. If you haven't tried it, they do shave soaps, brushes, aftershaves, EDPs, lotions. They got into hand sanitizer during COVID, but then his wife, Rod's wife Mandy, I think is the one that got into the coffee roasting business. Anyway, I had a issue with one of their candles that they actually reached out to me about because they found out they had a problem with a run of candles and kind of asked how we wanted the problem solved. And long story short, at the end I finally said, hey, can I just get a pound of coffee instead? And they said sure. So here we go. So you can see here's the bit, what are they calling it, the atmospheric river of rain coming through California. I know south of us it's supposed to be worse. It was howling here last night and raining. If it sounded like the car was going through a car wash with as hard as the rain was hitting the windows and stuff. And it was supposed to rain this morning, and I was waiting for the rain to come and go to come out and do this, and it kept getting pushed back, and then here's the rain. So anyway, I've been doing a lot of thinking. All right, everybody make your jokes. Got it out of the way. But kind of been listening to a couple of guys, had a few experiences, and I went to make this video a week ago, before I started listening to a book written by one of the people I've been listening to, but I didn't. And so I try to keep the focus of this talk somewhat, so we don't go into hours of it, and trying to stay away from topics that I've talked about before. They're a little more divisive. Anyway, what the main point of these people I started listening to is just at the pure basic level of it is using facts to drive decisions, not emotion, not personal preferences, that kind of stuff. And while you can, it's at least being aware of the facts of a situation before you make your choices, and being able to explain, yeah, I know these are this truth, but I still want to do this, or I'm weighing the risks and deciding what risks I want to take, but at least I acknowledge the risks, that kind of stuff. And I guess I could make it too basic and maybe we'd be done in 5 minutes. But anyway, I've been, listening to this kind of stuff and then pointing out facts about certain situations. Some of it around, just because it was just such a part of our world, the decisions people were making around COVID and what was based on facts and what was based on just whatever it was. But even outside of that, one of them gets into kind of like sexual orientation, or what people might classify themselves at, and saying, well, yes, in your DNA there can only be two, but in terms of the society we live in, the reality is there's obviously more than just male female, because people think or feel or say that they are. So that's the reality that we have to live in. And one line that I heard is that people are kind of linear thinkers, right? We want this or that, or be able to put people in categories, and that's just the way our brains are made. And I'll tell you, if I was to do school over again, I keep coming back to the way we think, and we don't know necessarily how memory works and how sleep works, and our brains are still, it drives us as people, but we still know so little about it that I think if I had to start school over again, I'd either get into psychology, neuroscience, something like that, or deep sea welding. They're a little bit different, but both of them fascinate me. And we can get into that a whole nother video. But one of the concepts when these guys keeps coming back to is our brains are not built for thinking on a spectrum. We want to this or that, or we're not built. Our brains are not just built to deal with statistics. We just want emotion or personal experience. And that's why in commercials you don't hear, oh, the statistics that we ran for the safety of this medication or whatever is this, because people, one, they don't really know how to define that or what it means or whatever, so they put out, hey, it worked for Bob, so because it worked for Bob, it'll work for you, which is completely untrue. Everybody's an individual. You know, he could be 1 in 100 that it worked for. Even if it worked, he was 51 of 49, that means you got a 50-50 chance of the medication working, right? If they gave it to you that way, it's like, flip a coin, it'll work for you, it won't. A lot of people say, well, I don't want to take that. But if you heard it work for Bob, or your neighbor said, which, right, was a whole lot of what was going on, not choosing side, but again, thinking about it from a thought process and logical thinking and facts and stuff. When the last year of COVID, is certainly we got to that, right? That I had a friend that this happened, and so that's my truth. When that has nothing to do with statistics, that has nothing to do with what happens all the time, you know. Anyway, it's just interesting to think that our brains might not necessarily be wired to think of things in certain manners. And even a point that he makes about that is that, you know, learning algebra and stuff in high school, that it's not just about learning how to solve for X, not learning just to do equations or Pythagorean theorem or whatever that you may very well not have to use the rest of your life. You know, if you're in science or something, you would, but many people wouldn't. But it's the process of learning that math, of learning how to problem solve, actually wires your brain in a way where that problem solving ability will come to play, or could come to play in the future. And that's all true, that if you don't learn in certain aspects, like learning music, learning something creative, you know, we know from learning languages that it's much easier to do when you're young than when you're older. Why is that, right? It's easier to form new neural networks and things as you're younger. When you're older, kind of you're set in your ways, is the way it is. So anyway, you got this logic stuff going on, and I got off track there. Shocking. When you're talking about things on a continuum or a spectrum or whatever, like so sexuality, if it's not man or woman, if there's in between, if there's I'm a woman but I like to dress like a man, but I say I'm a woman, I'm a tomboy, right? Which has been fine. So just there is something that's not just man or woman, right? You're not your typical female. So the whole point of getting to that is that people can be uncomfortable with what other people say that they are, what they want to be, or who they align with, and that's fine. You don't have to be comfortable with the way that everybody wants to live their life. You live your life the way you want to and all that, but it got down to is, but you don't make laws based on you being uncomfortable. And I think that's the first time I've heard it that way, and I really like that, is that, you know, the law against this or against that, is it really because it's affecting our society in a safety manner, which laws should be about, right? Laws should be about safety. It shouldn't be right. We have this rule, no religion plays into the government, right? So if it's just because it's in your Bible, well then, great. You do you. Let everybody else do everybody else, but you can't make laws because your Bible says so. Is it just because you don't think that's the way the family should be? Whatever the law is. Or that's what somebody should do with their body or whatever. Well, then that's just because you feel uncomfortable with the way they're doing it, right? Which is fine. You can be uncomfortable. I'm looking, we've got some huge birds. Sometimes we get hawks out here. It's really cool. But I like that just because you're uncomfortable doesn't mean it should be a law. That's just something for you to deal with. You don't have to be comfortable with the way everybody lives their lives. So anyway, that was kind of thought one, is that I really liked the way that was put. And if I sound a little junky, I was home from work yesterday sick and still kind of getting on. It's not COVID, but it kind of felt like it. So not this last week, but the week before, we had the Joint Commission come and survey our hospital. And if you don't know what that is, I'll just say that it's a pretty big deal. It's a few folks going around and basically finding fault where they can with what we do or what we document or whatever, and then we have to fix it. And I was thinking through that process, because I was escorting one of the lead surveyor around, and talking a lot with both of them, is that this was what's really refreshing. In what manner? It was stressful. You're worried about what they're gonna find. You want to look good to your superiors, basically, and you want to know that we're doing the right thing. And anyway, I'll take you back to the midst of COVID, when we were running just crazy hours, day after day, weekends included, all this stuff. And I had to stop watching the news. I could not watch the news anymore. And part of it was because of all the emotion and non-logical thought, and here I'm living in a world of science, and this is what the science proves right now. And as with science at all times, it's evolving, right? Especially this is evolving very quickly. And for people that aren't science focused and knowing that we do the research, here's what we know now, we're still researching it, okay, now we know more, so we're going to change what we do. That makes sense. It can be frustrating, but some people took that as, well, these people don't know what they're doing. No, that's how science works. So anyway, I had to stop watching, and very rarely do anymore, to this point, kind of as a result of that. But here's what I'm trying to get to, is that sitting with these people was refreshing, because it was about facts, and it was about, here's the standards that you have to meet. They are written down. Show us how you are meeting these. If you're doing something differently, explain to us why the way you're doing it meets what we say that you have to do. It wasn't about emotion, and it wasn't about, well, the hospital next door said it's a good idea, so we decided we would do it too. It doesn't work. Just sitting there like, these are my people. They want facts and they want data. They say, show us what you're doing is working. Show us your data that you're improving things. And I'm like, yes, this is what all conversation should be like when it comes to major issues. And that's what one of these guys ended up saying when I started listening to his book, is just that you don't see scientists, or not often, raising their voice when they're debating an issue, because they're debating facts, and one of them will either prove the other one is wrong with logical reasoning and facts, or vice versa, or maybe they're both wrong. But it's not emotion, and it's not personal attacks, and it's not, well, because I'm aligned with this fraction of the government, then I think this way. It's, here's the facts, here's why we think this way, here's the proof behind it. I'm just like, this is just so refreshing to me. And it was a weird feeling that even though we were in the midst of like this stressful audit, that it was, that's all I can say, it was a refreshing to be around people that's their focus and not the other. So that was the big thing. So I started listening to this book, and so he talks some about that, right? About how, and it's tough because nobody wants to spend their lives researching everything, reading the studies for themselves, all this, which is one reason why you should, in theory, trust the experts. You trust the people that have been taught to do whatever it is. One of the problems we have now is that, just like, so the best research is not the double-blind study. It's review of double-blind studies, right? If somebody makes a discovery, it's not published until it can be repeated in 3 other places, right? Just Bob, my neighbor Bob, one thing happening to him isn't good enough for the scientific community. You have to show that it's always that way for it to be a fact. Where was I going with this? Oh, that at some point you have to trust those. But the problem now with information and social media and stuff being so widespread and it's so easy to share information is that unless you're reading the journals, unless you're going to the CDC and folks like that, somebody can put out a study that says completely the opposite of everybody else. Nobody can repeat that study, but because it's going to get headlines and it's going to get attention because it says, no, that's wrong, this is the way that it is, then it sticks in people's mind. And people that like to be defiant, or I'm not a sheep, or I'm going to be different, will glom onto that and go, see, you are all wrong. You 50 scientists are wrong. This is the guy I'm going to believe. When it's like that, again, that's not how science works. They come to a consensus, right? You get everybody doing the same study and agreeing and getting the same results. That's the truth, not some dude in his own lab that nobody can reproduce. But by the time, nobody likes that story, right? They just want to hear, I'm proving everybody wrong, and that's where the excitement is and stuff like that. So I'm trying to think of a few examples that I've heard about starting to read this story. Anyway, it's very interesting because part of what's being pointed out is the facts that people just feel are just ingrained maybe in our society that split everybody aren't necessarily true. And so again, coming back to COVID, the anti-vaxxers, right? Right now, the midst of COVID and stuff, in general, people think the anti-vaxxers are the Republicans, right? If you don't believe in vaccines, then you're a Trumpy or whatever. But you point out who was the first anti-vaxxers. They were the rich Democrats down in Southern California, right? Shooting, you're gonna get autism, you're gonna get this, you're gonna get that. That's not it. It wasn't always, but we forget that, right? And so then we want to lay blame. And so there's a lot of that where, or that Republicans are anti-science. But the greatest increases in scientific spending have been with Republican presidents, not the Democrats. And so it's like you say that they don't believe in science, and yet they're supporting it more than the other party. And again, the way it's presented isn't a taking sides kind of thing, because they do it both ways. And so anything that's like known as for one party or another, if you look at enough facts, you realize that that's not true. So that was interesting. And this guy says, the people that read my book, you need to first come with an open mind, because some of the things that you really just believe might be proven wrong by reading my book. Of course, the people that would need it the most aren't going to be interested in that, right? You're like, well, I believe what I believe and nobody can tell me any different. And go, that's the problem. That's the problem. It's kind of like, it's interesting because he was looking at a section of it is how quickly technology advances. And, we think about back to the 1800s until now, and there's people that are like 90 years old that you look at all the stuff that wasn't around, but you don't even have to go back that far. But even, he quoted somebody, I think it was in the late 1800s or something like, anyway, just before the plane was invented, saying that we will, in the next century, we will not see the transportation advancements as this last century has shown us. And the plane hadn't even been invented yet. But when you're in the moment, you're your scientific discoveries are happening faster than they had the time previous to you. And so you feel like we're in it now. This is high technology, which it is at the time. Just like we feel like that now, right? That this is like, look at what we can do, look how we can travel, look at this computer in your hand that, has many times the processing power of what took us to the moon, right? And it's in almost everybody's hand right now. And so it's very arrogant to think that we're in the heat of the high technology, right? Because it's just going to keep going. It's going to pass us by. So 30 years from now, whatever we're doing, whatever we're using, however we're communicating, will be obsolete. And who knows what it's going to be, right? Just in my time, we went from records to cassette tapes to CDs to nothing, right? You're streaming almost everything. And I'm not that old, right? Well, there was no cell phones when people my age grew up. And look at us now. What did he say? It was from 2007 or something. That was the smartphone, not that long ago. And now there's billions of smartphones. So in less than, 2 decades. Anyway, so if you take that to the way people think, that they born knowing nothing, right? You get taught, you learn, you go to school, you get jobs that teach you things you don't need to know, and that all of a sudden you just know and nobody can change your mind? Like what? How does that work? All of a sudden you're a obnoxious teenager at 35 or 45 or 55 years old that just knows more than everybody else because you say that you do? That's not the way it works. So last thing, let's see, what are we at? 22 minutes. I'll wrap this. Again, not a lot of point to this, just that it's got me using logical thought and using facts and all that stuff. It's just, I like hearing about that because it's refreshing to me that, that's the way that you should discuss issues, is here's the facts. Not, I don't like it, or I don't feel it's right, or I believe. It's what are the facts. And then have an argument on the facts and how you deal with the facts, not how do you deal with your emotions in a law or anyway. But this was an interesting point when he was also talking about how we don't deal with, people aren't interested in statistics and data, and they just want the emotion and what feels right. So, short story, then we'll wrap this up. So Monsanto made a crop of corn, right? Probably a lot of people know this, that they took out the gene for susceptibility to Roundup, right? Whatever chemical that was. And so they could plant fields of corn, spray Roundup on the whole thing, kills everything except for the corn. So in terms of industrial farming, very economical, and you don't have problems with weeds and all this stuff. Of course, problem is what? You get some of the Roundup into your corn. So one small side effect is that Ben & Jerry's uses some corn syrup in their ice cream as sweetener, and I don't know how it got to this point, but some lab somewhere discovered that there's some Roundup in Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And so Ben & Jerry's, with people, or people of the earth type of, culture around them and all that stuff, said, hey, we are now going to use only non-GMO corn syrup. Of course, it's more expensive and all that. Fine, whatever. That's what the people that buy Ben & Jerry's want to hear. But here's the point that was made about this, is that everything that you put into your body has a lethal dose. It can be a little, it can be a lot. And then they ranked lethal doses of all sorts of different things. So there's a lethal dose for salt, and a lethal dose for sugar, and there's a lethal dose for a Roundup. And it's like milligrams per 50 kilograms body weight or something like that, where half the people would die if they ingested that much. So, something like that is how they measure a lethal dose of any substance. that you could be ingesting. But you know what is much so the less you need of it, right, is the more deadly it is, right? You need to ingest less amount to die. So what's less than Roundup? Caffeine, right? Caffeine, you need fewer milligrams of this than Roundup to kill you. Now, given who knows how many cups of coffee you'd have to ingest to get to that point, but interesting fact, people would just assume, well, a poison, it's got to be the worst, right? You know what's way worse than caffeine? Nicotine, right? So anyway, but I'm not a good storyteller. I wish I was, because I have mutual respect for people that can tell a story better than myself. Long story short, what they end up getting to is pointing out that in the ice cream, to get to the lethal dose of sugar that's in the ice cream, you would have to eat like 40 pints or something like that, right? Again, not something people are going to sit down and do, so you don't have to worry about that, whatever. But to get to the lethal dose of how much Roundup was in there, I don't remember, it was tens of thousands of pints or something like that you would have to get to. So logically, there was no need to even worry about it. The amount that's in there made no difference. The amount of sugar that's in there is worse for your body, using these statistics, than Roundup. But Roundup's a poison, so even the most minuscule amount, people aren't interested in the explanation. They just want to know you've done something so they're not exposed to it. That's what drives me nuts. That's what makes me stop watching the news. And it's I guess it's the lack of trust, right? That you've got the conspiracy theory. We're going off track. I'm at 27 minutes. I'll just mention it and we'll go. Is that people get called a sheep if they're going to believe in the groups of people like the FDA or whatever that are put out there to protect society. Yet you've got no data to support that. Why wouldn't you trust? That's where I'm coming from. Is you've got people that measure this stuff, that know about it, that they don't want to die. They don't want their families to die. They don't want their neighbors to die. What the heck kind of, why would they purposefully do stuff that would make it dangerous for the rest of us? And I'm sure some people, they get kickbacks from this and that. Really? Really? Anyway, we'll just wrap it up there. Logical thought, man. That's my peace of mind. That's my heaven. Show me the statistics. Show me the facts. Show me scientists that agree on something. And then let's talk about what we're going to do about that. Not whether or not it's a fact. Facts are facts. See you on the forums.